Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King. Today, I'm back with the next installment of my complete run madness, where I'm showing off my complete run of Usagi Yojimbo. Something you're probably not going to see on anyone else's channel. Something that most of you aren't seeing on my channel. Yes, I love these comics, so I'm going to continue to show them off, even though I don't think I've done any videos on my channel that have had less views than these. But for those of you who are in the know, who know quality comics, like Usagi Yojimbo, I'm going to keep doing this. Last time around, we had gotten up to the beginning of the Dark Horse run, so I showed Dark Horse issues 1 to 50. Today, we're going to do the next part of the Dark Horse run, issues 51 to 100, which has a bunch of classic storylines in it. I said last time I felt like Dark Horse, the first 50, 100 issues are where they, like, it's where Stan really hit his stride. And for me, it's probably the best of the series is this Dark Horse 1 to 100. So we're going to get into some of the cool stuff here. I'll show you in a second. Real quick, again, one of the reasons I'm doing this particular run is right now I have a comic on Kickstarter, Quest. It's an epic fantasy series. The link is in the comments down below. And whenever I'm working on Quest, I really start thinking about all the cool fantasy comics. Usagi Yojimbo, sort of fantasy adjacent, I would say, but it does have some like supernatural elements and stuff, and a lot of cool swords and fighting, and a lot of historical elements, which are awesome. We'll definitely be talking about that here. Whenever I'm working on a Quest, I like to highlight some of the fantasy comics that influenced me. I've shown my run of Warlord in the past, for instance, and at some point I'm going to show my complete run of Conan the Barbarian as well. So that's coming sometime relatively soon. But for now, we're going to keep going with Usagi Yojimbo, the Dark Horse series. So that's volume 3, and we're going to issues 51 to 100 now. Again, disclaimer, I've said before, I don't have a whole lot to necessarily say about most of these because I bought all 200 some issues at the time, all at once when I put my run together, and then read them all at once. I hadn't actually read them before I bought them all. And so they kind of blur together a little for me. It's hard for me to remember specifics, and when I do remember specific stories, I don't necessarily remember what issue they were in. So there's going to be a couple here where I have specific things to say, but a lot of them I'm just kind of going to be showing you the covers, talking in general about the series. So here's issue 51. One of the rare covers in the series that does not have Usagi Yojimbo Miyamoto Usagi, the main character, on the front cover. Some of these I want to show you the back covers. Most of the ones I have here have boards, so I won't really be able to show them. But at some point he started doing these back cover sketches. A lot of the earlier ones, they don't really have anything on the back cover. It's just like a logo or whatever, but he started doing these cool sketches, doodles. I don't know what quite would call them, but the cool back cover art. So that's neat to see. In particular, like this is a throwback. This is issue 52. This is his pet Spot, who died way back before this, before the Dark Horse series even started. So real throwback there. 53. It's cool. He's got the fish that are kind of like they're like windsocks. I love it when he puts in the details with the of the cultural historical details. 54. Now, if you're looking close here, really cool cover. Him being forced off the side of the cliff by all of these attackers. You can see he has in his arms a little kid, literally a kid, because it's a baby goat. Recurring characters in here are Lone Goat and Kid, which is obviously, sort of a homage / spoof of the famous series Lone Wolf and Cub. And it's the same thing. It's a samurai who's a goat, and he has a little cart he pushes around, and he's got his son who's a kid. in the car, and so they reoccur once in a while. But it's interesting to see Kid on the cover here. 55. '56. Now this is part of a cool, one of my favorite stories in the series here, I'm pretty sure. The next issue suggests that I'm right. First of all, let's talk about the cover. Really cool cover. He has a lot of interesting sort of dramatic coloring choices. Tom Luth does the colors, I think, and they're really interesting, complementary sort of pastel palettes. Like if I was doing this, and I'm not a colorist, as you know, I'm colorblind, but like my instinct on a cover like this, with this kind of background, would be to have a much darker sky, a blue, like, or even a night sky, like a blue going into black, to really make this pop out against it. But that's not the color style that Tom Luth and Stan Sakai do in these. Also, we've noticed a couple of covers in pretty close succession that have a similar design. So here's 52 and 56, where you have the tip of the sword coming in from off, and we have our characters reacting to whatever menace is holding that sword. So that's interesting. Now this story here, I'll show you the next cover, 57. Here we have a flashback to Usagi, Miyamoto Usagi, when he's young, and here's his master. We've seen him on a couple of previous covers. This is part of a really cool storyline where one thing that's important to the series is that Miyamoto Usagi, he's a swords master. He's one of the great swords masters in the world. So he wins most of his fights because he's incredible. And one of the reasons that he's able to defeat so many people is that he has a very strange, unique style that most of the people he's fighting has never seen before. So he's very unpredictable because his patterns and his movement are totally different from anyone else's. That's because he learned this style from his master here, who created this special sword technique. And he's only had 3 pupils that have learned it, right? So what happens in this storyline is that Usagi is challenged by this swordsman who is going around challenging all the great swordsmen because he wants to prove he's the best. But of course, you know, it's sort of an exercise in ego in a way, because there's no purpose to it other than to prove he's the best, and the duels are to the death, right? So he's killing all of these people just to prove that he's a better swordsman than they are. And he challenges Usagi, who does not like doing that sort of thing because he values life. And the surprising thing is he loses. But the guy that defeats him doesn't kill him because he lets Miyamoto Usagi go. But the trade-off is that what he really wants to do is to fight Usagi's master. So there's a storyline that it goes for a while before that duel happens, but eventually when he goes back to see his master finally, he has to deliver the challenge from this guy. And the master has to sort of have this duel that he doesn't want to do to sort of uphold the honor of his pupil who lost. So it's a really interesting storyline. It's one of my favorites here. Although, to be honest, now that I'm looking at the later covers, I might have some of this off a little bit. Because actually, I don't think this is Usagi as a child. Because you'll see on the next cover, this is actually... Everything I said is 100% correct. Because that story I was talking about. But it's not from these issues. This is actually his son, Jotaro. Now, in the series, his son doesn't know that he's Usagi's son. But he finds out that he's Usagi's son. So Usagi knows that Jotaro is his son. Jotaro knows that Usagi is his father, but neither of them know that the other one knows, and they're sort of bound by these societal traditions that they can't say anything because they don't want to break the promise, the secret, right? It's confidential, so they never actually talk about it. But we'll see here in a little bit that they end up traveling together quite a bit and have these bonding moments. But so here they are all together. And this guy here is the guy I was talking about, the swords master, who is challenging Usagi because he wants to fight Usagi's master. And here's where they have the duel in issue 60. And I love this story. Absolutely love this story. I mean, what happens is the master wins and he is forced to kill the challenger, which he doesn't want to do, but he's sort of forced to. Again, very interesting backgrounds. The sky, this sort of burst. To me, it feels like it's clearly like a I mean, these issues are coming out in the early 2000s, and this feels like a very early sort of use of computer coloring. And I say that because when I'm doing my comics, you have different brushes that give you different digital effects, and sort of the watercolor sort of smudge blur thing is what I see here, where we have this color and then we have this color, and then there's a thing blurring them in between, creating this sort of starburst effect. Particularly here, you can see right there, there's a solid line, which to me feels like that was originally the line that demarcated this color from this color. And when they were doing the blurring, they decided to leave that line in for whatever reason. I'm always very careful. I don't like having those clear lines, so I always make sure to blur the lines out so it's not obvious where the join is happening. I mean, it still looks cool, but it's just interesting. I don't think you would see this kind of thing now. 61. And now we're into the part of the series where Usagi and Jotaro are traveling together. 62. Another really interesting coloring job, because look how there are these undead skeleton samurai in the background, but they're colored in this flat color, and even it's not just the coloring. So I'm going to go back to the digital creation here. You know, the black lines of the artwork are actually pulled back, so they're not a flat black. They don't have the same full black as the foreground lines. They're almost like a lighter gray. If you're doing something on Photoshop, you can take that layer with the lines and you can pull it back to like 60% to have it recede into the background. And it looks to me like what they've done is they've colored in all the background, and then they've taken the whole background and they've pushed it back a certain percentage, so that not just the colors are sort of flatter, but even the black lines are flatter, so that it seems like it's receded a little bit, so that the main characters pop out into the foreground. Again, techniques that you wouldn't have seen 20 years before this, when the series was originally debuting in the mid 80s. 63. Really striking colors, again, bold design. 64. 65. And here's Jotaro facing off against this guy here with the big long nose. He's a character that's appeared a few times. He's part of he's a mythological sort of race of creatures in this story. Don't remember what his name is though. 66. '67. We're getting more covers without Miyamari Usagi, as now that he has Jotaro with him in each issue. Jotaro is appearing on a lot more of the covers. So here's Jotaro defending other children against a bunch of monsters. 68, Usagi watching basically kaiju fighting. 69. 70. Here's another cover with Usagi's master on it. 71. 72. Coloring is interesting to me because it's at night, everything is toned down. And again, that goes against I like everything high contrast. So if I was doing something like this, I would definitely have all the dark in the background, dark like this. I would have even the buildings and the other elements of the background, right? But the characters, I wouldn't have the shading. I would still have them fully bright so you could see the characters more easily. Now, I am colorblind, and so it's a little bit harder for me to see the detailing when they have these effects like this, these nighttime effects, where everything is sort of at the same tone because of the nighttime, the lighting being applied like that. One thing I wanted to comment on is we're starting to see a couple things I want to comment on. First of all, these last few issues here have this special button on it. Now, we've seen something like this before when it was the 100th issue of Usagi Yojimbo, but this says on it 20th anniversary. So that means these are now coming out in 2004 to 2005. The other thing I wanted to comment on is you see here a really cool cover with Usagi looking quite mean here. These are rabbits you don't want to mess with. They're sitting under this bridge. But the other thing is you start to see the effects of time passing. So it's the 20 years in the comic, but time's passing inside the story as well. And Usagi is starting to look older, more grizzled, more wear and tear on him. And we start to see more covers like this, where Usagi looks like he's been through some stuff since the beginning of the series. 74, another giant. 75, very interesting cover here with Usagi himself off the top. Jotaro's got a really interesting expression. I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening here, to be honest. He's sort of side-eyeing the swords. He looks conflicted, sad, I'm not quite sure. This might be the story, looking ahead real quick, where Usagi brings Jotaro back home so they're no longer traveling together. I think that might be the case because I'm not seeing him on the next run of covers. The other thing is there's no logo. So it's a really interesting choice. 76. 77. Now here we have the inspector. I want to say his name is Inspector Shida, but I'm not sure. It's been a while for me. But again, no Sagi on the cover. And this is a character who's like he's basically like a police detective who shows up from time to time. He has a whole long storyline coming up much later after this, almost 100 issues later. But he does appear from time to time. He's a really cool character. I love these supporting characters that do appear over and over again, but they have gaps of years and years in between appearances. You know what? I'll talk about that right now real quick because I was thinking about this earlier. Time, it's not just the time's passing, but Stan Sakai has everything mapped out, literally mapped out. A map of Japan, And Usagi's wandering around Japan, and everything's has time passing in a chronological fashion that you can actually follow if you want to. So it doesn't just jump from he's here and the weather's like X, and then the next issue he's somewhere completely different and it's a different season. It's not like that. It it goes from place to place where if he's here on the map in the next story he's here, or maybe he's here, but he's not like jumping past a bunch of stuff. And you can follow the seasons as they progress, because the time of year will change as Usagi's walking around. The time passes, different seasons go along, and so there's a logical progression to his wandering and to the time. And you can track, you could map out a timeline and a chart, an actual map of where he's moving and how he's moving forward through the years and through the stories, which I find really interesting. It gives, again, the series this continuity and this feeling of reality. Like the time is passing, things are happening in a logical way, and that there's a broader world that he's in, and that world is continuing past the edges of what we can see. 78. '79. Here's Gen, who at the time I'm recording this has not appeared in the series for a long time, for whatever reason. But it's cool to see him here. This character whose name I'm blanking on, we saw, who he's got the wanted poster for. We saw her before as well on a cover quite a while ago. 80. '81, and this appears to be Tomoe, who it's cool she gets her own cover here. She hasn't appeared in a while either. She was very important in the early issues of the series, but hasn't appeared for a while. But she's going to be back in the series here for a little bit. 82. So this is interesting. We've got him. Here's the guy. Here's Usagi facing off, but there is another character behind him who's also reaching for a sword at the same time, like an Old West thing. So again, some very interesting design choices and layout choices from Stan, with things like this, things that you can't see, like the one where Usagi's face is off the top of the cover, or the sword tips coming in. 83. Again, here's Usagi fighting side by side with Tomoe. 84, another Tomoe cover. 85. He has some real cartooning skills here. We've seen a few of these covers, some real exaggerated expressions and reactions, and here it looks as though he's about to get his hand cut off, and like this is, it wouldn't be out of place in like a Looney Tunes cartoon, but it still fits. And we also see the progression from one cover to the next. So here, this bad guy is about to chop the hand off, and Tomoe is rushing to save him. Next cover, the bad guy is grinning triumphant over Tomoe. Usagi is free, but you can see the story progressing on the covers, which is not something you see much these days. 87. And the same storyline. You can see the same characters. Tomoe really taking the spotlight in this story. Literally Tomoe in the spotlight on the cover of 89. 90. Usagi and Tomoe facing a ghost. it is interesting that we had all of that run, fairly long run, like over a year worth of issues with Jotaro traveling with Usagi, and then as soon as Jotaro is written out, now he has all these adventures with Tomoe. Again, part of it is the traveling around. So, he picked up his son when he was visiting his home village to talk to his master, and then they travel around for a while, come back to the village, and then that's not far from where Tomoe is. But the travels of Tomoe are about to come to an end. 91. Sorry, just looking ahead real quick. 92. Usagi and Tomoe smiling and looking happy. And then here we have 93, one of the most famous issues in the whole series. Arguably the most famous individual issue of Usagi Yojimbo in the almost 40 years now since it started. This is the famous tea ceremony issue. And what happens in this issue is Tomoe invites Usagi to have tea with her. And it's part of the story is Stan doing something he does once in a while where he really does a deep dive on the cultural history. And so he goes in like step by step in great detail to all the formal parts of a formal tea ceremony. But the other thing that happens here is that they're in this formal setting and they're constrained by society. They have their roles within society, and there's a lot of stuff they can't say. They can only sort of hint at. And they do that here in their conversations and through the tea ceremony itself. And essentially what happens here is that in the most subtle way, Tomoe sort of wants Usagi to stay so they can be together. And he would then swear oaths to her master, and they would be together. And he feels like he can't do that because he takes his oaths to his dead master seriously. He can't switch allegiances, even though his previous master no longer is dead, and the clan no longer exists. And there's more to it, but basically this is the issue where, for over 20 years at this point, there's clearly been this thing between Usagi and Tomoe, sort of a will they get together. And this is the issue where just over the course of the tea and the things they don't say to each other, it becomes clear that they're not going to be together, even though they should be together. So it's a great comic book. I also had the chance to see some of the original art from this issue at several years ago. The Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Mass. is actually a quite nice art museum considering it's, the relatively small size of the city. And they were doing, they have a while ago they absorbed another museum called the Higgins Museum of Arms and Armory. And they have like the biggest collection of medieval armor and weapons in the Western Hemisphere or something. And so now that's all at the Worcester Art Museum, and they opened a new wing. And part of that, they were doing a thing about armor, and they were contrasting the Western armor with Eastern armor. And they had a whole section of original art from Usagi Yojimbo, and they had several pages from issue 93. So I got to see these pages, the originals. Also, great back cover sketch of Tomoe here. And she's sort of, it's almost like knowing what happens in the issue, it's almost like a sunset. Like she's sort of looking back as she's about to turn away because that path is closed. But the series keeps going. Usagi leaves. And we have more adventures here. 94. 95. 96. As I've been going through these, you may have noticed all sorts of different stickers on these back issues. My first issue, we're still not close to it. It was like 141 or something. Getting these back issues was not easy. Here's another recurring character. I'm blanking on his name, but he's a dog samurai who starts off sort of as a villain, and basically we find out he's like a bounty hunter, so he's a rival to Gen, and we find out that he basically, even though he's like a violent a-hole, he's actually doing it all, and all the money he raises he's using to fund this like orphanage. So he's sort of like, he eventually sort of teams up with Gen in later issues. But we get another thing here, another sword coming in off screen, and we can see our heroes are in trouble. Gen's been injured. Very dramatic. Here's something really unusual, really cool cover, 99. Check this one out. Everything, including the logo, is all a reflection in the water. So we have the stanchion of a bridge up here, and there's a fight taking place up here on the bridge, and we only see the fight in the reflection here. Here's Usagi with his swords up. The other people there. But there are a couple things here that are actually in the water. So if you look down in this corner, there's actually a dead body in the water with blood coming out of it. And you can see there's some stones sticking up out of the water. But we have this reflection here of Usagi killing all of these people on the bridge. And it's just so cool what they did with the logo. It's such a cool cover. And then here we are, issue 100, the Dark Horse 100th issue, which is signed. I don't remember getting the sign, but I'm going to guess maybe I did. But whether it was me or someone else, it is signed. And this has a bunch of guest artists. Sergio Aragonés, Guy Davis, and other writers too. Mark Evanier, of course, Sergio Aragonés and Mark Evanier and Stan Sakai work on Gru together. But it's got stuff from Frank Miller and Scott Shaw and Matt Wagner, Jeff Smith. It's got a bunch of cool stuff in it. So there's issue 100. It's nice to see it get the 100th issue treatment, because they didn't really do that for the 100th overall issue of the series. There was just a little button, not even this big, mentioning it. But for the 100th Dark Horse issue, get the 100 in the corner, and boom. So that's it for this time. Thanks very much for watching. Those of you who have still been watching these, let me know what you think down below. You can check out Quest on Kickstarter. Link in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.